The life and crimes of Harold Shipman. Doctor of death. At first glance, Harold Shipman seemed to be just another ordinary doctor. He wore the white coat, attended to his patients, and worked long hours, all while maintaining an air of compassion. Welcome to our channel Plunge into Crime. If you want to save your and your family life from this type of criminals, please share the content and subscribe the channel. He was seen by the public as a trustworthy family physician, someone who was deeply embedded in the community. However, behind this facade lay a chilling truth. Shipman was a murderer, responsible for the deaths of hundreds of his patients. He became one of the most notorious serial killers in history. But how could someone trusted with people's health turn into a cold-blooded killer? Born on January 14, 1946, in Nottingham, England. Shipman's early years were marked by the death of his mother, Vera, from lung cancer when Harold was just 17 years old. This loss had a profound effect on him, and some experts speculate that it may have triggered an obsession with death. After her passing, Shipman vowed to make his way in the world, eventually enrolling in medical school. It was during his time as a medical student that the first signs of his dark tendencies began to emerge. After successfully completing his studies at Leeds University Medical School, Shipman went on to pursue a career as a general practitioner. He settled in the small town of Todmorden, in the northern part of England. It was here that Shipman would begin his life of crime. Although his career appeared to be blossoming, it was at this point that the first deaths under suspicious circumstances occurred. These deaths would go unnoticed for years, as Shipman continued to maintain his reputation as a compassionate doctor. Despite his professional success, something dark and sinister was brewing beneath the surface. What appeared to be a caring and empathetic medical professional was, in fact, a predator hiding behind his stethoscope. Early life and career. Harold Shipman was born into a working-class family in Nottingham. His father, a factory worker, was a strict and demanding man, while his mother, Vera, was more nurturing. Vera's death from cancer in 1963 left a significant emotional scar on young Harold. Though this loss may have influenced his later actions, no one could have predicted the horror that would follow. As a young man, Shipman excelled in school, and by all accounts, he was an intelligent and driven student. His peers described him as ambitious and focused, but they also noted a certain coldness in his personality. Shipman's drive to succeed was palpable, and he was determined to enter the medical profession, which he saw as a way to make a real difference in people's lives. Shipman attended Leeds University Medical School, where he completed his studies and earned his degree in 1970. He soon began his medical career as a junior doctor in various hospitals. During this time, he demonstrated skill in his field and earned the respect of his colleagues. However, his personal life and social behavior remained a mystery to those around him. While outwardly professional, there were early signs that Shipman lacked the warmth and empathy typically expected of a doctor. As a young physician, Shipman was described as distant and sometimes aloof. But he quickly rose to prominence in his field and landed a position in the town of Todmorden. There, Shipman set up his practice as a general practitioner, where he would eventually carry out his heinous crimes. At first, Shipman appeared to be an ideal doctor for the small town. He was friendly, efficient, and trustworthy. He took great care in diagnosing his patients and even made house calls, a practice that endeared him to many of the elderly residents. But behind this public persona was a man who saw his patients not as people to care for, but as opportunities to carry out his deadly obsession. The crimes begin. Harold Shipman's first murder may have occurred as early as 1975, although no one would know it at the time. His method of operation was disturbingly simple. Shipman would inject his victims with heroin, often in small doses, and then watch them die. He chose elderly women, typically those who lived alone, and he would often carry out the killings in their homes. The strange thing was, Shipman's victims didn't seem to raise any alarms initially. The elderly women who died under his care were often diagnosed with natural causes, such as heart failure or strokes. Death was common among the elderly, and Shipman's explanations were often accepted without question. However, the number of deaths in Shipman's practice began to raise eyebrows. In particular, the local undertaker, Brian Burgess, grew suspicious after noticing the unusually high number of funerals for Shipman's patients. Burgess began comparing death certificates, and it soon became clear that something was amiss. He noticed that many of the deaths were listed as natural causes, but in some cases, the circumstances seemed too coincidental. After Burgess shared his concerns with the police, an investigation was launched. In 1998, the police began looking into Shipman's practice and reviewing the death certificates of his patients. It didn't take long for them to realize that many of these deaths appeared to have been caused by unnatural means. Shipman was the common factor in nearly every case, and the police began to suspect foul play. Shipman's method of administering the heroin was particularly clever. He was careful to avoid leaving physical evidence, and he often made it look as though his patients had simply passed away in their sleep. By the time the authorities started to investigate, many of Shipman's victims had already been buried, their deaths brushed aside as natural causes. The investigation and arrest with mounting evidence of suspicious deaths, the police finally launched a full-scale investigation into Harold Shipman in 1998. They began to examine hundreds of death certificates and medical records, meticulously tracing each of Shipman's patients. The deeper they dug, the more horrifying the findings became. At the heart of the investigation was Shipman's access to controlled substances, particularly heroin. He had the authority to prescribe these powerful drugs to his patients, and he used this privilege to carry out his killings. The police uncovered forged medical records and manipulated death certificates that painted a disturbing picture. Shipman was arrested on September 7, 1998, and taken into custody. He was charged with 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. The authorities were stunned by the sheer scale of his crimes. Shipman had managed to kill with impunity for decades, and the death toll was believed to be much higher than the 15 confirmed murders. Shipman's arrest was only the beginning. As the investigation continued, police found evidence that Shipman may have killed as many as 300 people during his career. His trial was set to begin in October 1999, and the nation was captivated by the details of the case. The conviction and aftermath. The trial of Harold Shipman began in October 1999. Over the course of the proceedings, the prosecution laid out a detailed case, demonstrating how Shipman had exploited his medical position to carry out his murders. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Despite his earlier claims of innocence, Shipman was found guilty of 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the judge noting that Shipman would never be released from prison. The horror of his crimes left the country reeling, and many questions remained unanswered. How could a trusted doctor commit such atrocities? And how did Shipman manage to escape detection for so long? Shipman's conviction led to widespread reforms in medical regulations. New safeguards were put in place to ensure that doctors could not abuse their prescribing privileges, and protocols for investigating suspicious deaths in the medical profession were strengthened. Conclusion: the case of Harold Shipman remains one of the most disturbing and perplexing stories of modern criminal history. A trusted family doctor who turned into a mass murderer, Shipman exploited his position of authority to carry out his grisly killings. He preyed on the most vulnerable members of society, those who trusted him with their lives. Shipman's legacy is one of tragedy and betrayal. Families lost loved ones in the most horrific of circumstances, and the medical community was left to grapple with the truth about a man who had been allowed to operate unchecked for so long. Even now, questions remain. What drove Shipman to kill? Was it a thirst for power, an obsession with death, or something else entirely? The answers may never be fully understood. But one thing is certain: Harold Shipman's crimes left a permanent mark on history. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the life and crimes of Harold Shipman. If you found this story insightful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Until next time, stay vigilant and always question the people you trust.